Okay, so I wear two hats, as Vicky said. I'm a partner at CAG Consultants, and we work mainly with public sector clients at CAG, providing advice, research, engagement on energy, climate change, and other sustainability issues. And then I also run Green Small Business, which provides support to small businesses specifically on environmental action planning, and we provide independent certification for those businesses as well. And in this session, I'm going to try and kind of join the dots between some work that I've been involved in with both of those hats on, in a way that I hope will be in some way relevant and useful to this workshop. Worth saying at the outset that I am not a procurement expert by any stretch. These are really just some non-expert reflections on what I've seen happening in this space in this work that I've been involved with. I'll start off with some recent work that I've been doing with CAG. So I'm sure you're all aware of the climate emergency declarations that have been made. I just had a look yesterday, and the climate emergency declaration website says 501 councils in Britain now have made a declaration, 1,900 jurisdictions worldwide, and in many cases those declarations have been accompanied by very radical commitments to reduce carbon, or to set such commitments at some point in the near future. And at CAG, we've been working with councils on working out what net zero means in practice, so how they can deliver on those commitments that they've made. And the most in-depth work that we've done so far has been with two councils. So Lewisham, firstly, who declared a climate emergency in February of 2019. And their commitment was to be a net zero carbon borough. This, hugely ambitious, net zero carbon borough, scope 1, 2, 3 emissions by 2030. They then came to us and said, okay, can you help us work out how we're going to do that, please? Which was fun. And then with Conwy in North Wales, who similarly declared a climate emergency back in 2019, similarly made a commitment to deliver that to deliver net zero carbon by 2030. But the difference there was that was solely focused on the council's own emissions, but including scope 3 emissions as far as they felt it was proportionate to do so. And there is some Welsh government guidance now on net zero and reporting on it that they have sought to follow. So both of these pieces of work involved quite detailed and quite complex modeling of different trajectories and scenarios that could deliver those different levels of carbon reduction. And you may well have been involved in similar exercises in your own council. This is one of the trajectories from the Lewisham work that we did. You can see here the blue, so this is kind of baseline or business as usual trajectory. Then we've got a core action trajectory, which is actions that were already committed to by the council to one extent or another. we had a radical stretch scenario, which really was radical and was, you know, showing us delivering a more than halving of emissions by 2030. And clearly that wasn't enough. So we then introduced a fourth scenario, which really was kind of moonshot stuff, which we called systemic change. And that took Lewisham's emissions down, you know, quite significantly. But you can still see there some fairly significant residual emissions, even under that very, very radical scenario. Similar exercise was conducted in Conwy, and each of those trajectories in Lewisham and in Conwy was kind of built from the bottom up. So we had to map out a series of actions that would deliver those different levels of carbon reduction that I showed you in those different trajectories. So this is an extract from one of the action plan tables in the Conwy work, showing, you know, the various actions, the year that the action will be implemented, the carbon savings that would be achieved, the estimated capital cost, and then any cost savings that would be achieved by 2030. And one of the big challenges that this sort of process highlights is the significance of supply chain emissions. So this is Conwy's baseline emissions from 2018-19, and you can see that emissions from the procurement of goods and services by the council make up a huge proportion of their total emissions. In Conwy's case, it was 62% of total emissions, which, based on what Emma said earlier, is a relatively low figure overall, but still, you know, by far and away the biggest proportion of the council's emissions. So these are emissions from road transport that's commissioned, from waste management, from adult social care provision, and things like that. And you can see on this next chart that even with the most radical package of actions in Conwy up to 2030, the residual emissions from the supply chain, so that purple block in the chart there, are still very significant, and the major contributor to the rather chunky offsetting requirement that Conwy would be faced with in 2030 in order to meet their net zero target. That's the sort of grey hashed box on the chart. And as well as the sheer scale of the emissions associated with procurement, there are a couple of other big challenges that Conwy thought about. So one was just the sheer complexity of their procurement. So the council told us, for example, that they had over 100 contracts in place for the provision of adult social care. And so there was no way of kind of addressing the issue on a sort of individual contract basis. And what they were keen to identify were kind of global requirements that could be applied across all of their contracts, and to have a kind of external verification process. So having external standards that they could call for within their terms and conditions in order to reduce the burden on themselves, in order to verify the achievement of those standards. And then the council were also very conscious of the need to avoid overburdening their supply chains and risking not just increases in cost, but also potentially interruptions in supply. Being where they are in the country, relatively remote, relatively local supply chains, there was a clear need to avoid a situation where some goods and services simply couldn't be supplied to them if they set overly stringent requirements in relation to carbon. So the bottom line, I suppose, is that it'd be very easy for them to say that their suppliers in their supply to the council needed to be net zero, but it'd be quite another thing to monitor compliance with that in any sort of robust fashion, and to do so without significantly disrupting their supply chains. So we came up with a suggestion to them, just very high level at this point in their sort of roadmap, that they would set carbon requirements within their terms and conditions, that they would be relatively light touch at first, or sending some early signals in their terms and conditions, and then gradually increasing those requirements over time. So perhaps starting with some voluntary reporting of emissions, and then ramping up to net zero supply by 2030. And then alongside that, obviously, the need for that facilitation and enablement within supply chains through supporting local suppliers in particular. So they were talking about sector-based awareness raising activities, education and support of suppliers, and then providing and promoting access to external certification processes and carbon footprinting tools, and the rest of it. And that second element there about supporting local supply chains is one that I've been working on with another council in a sort of very practical, hands-on way through Green Small Business, and I'll say a little bit about that just now. So we work with small and micro businesses to help them think through their environmental impacts, and to better manage those impacts, and then we provide certification on top of that. Any of you familiar with ISO 14001? It's a kind of light touch version of ISO 14001, very specifically focused on kind of recognizing the constraints that small businesses face in addressing these issues. But very structured, very clear and structured framework for working through the issues. So thinking about activities, what impacts those activities generate, and then developing actions in response to those activities. And you know, we've worked with a very wide range of businesses now. Some of them on the screen there, from chocolate makers to bakers to builders to hotels, consultancies of all varieties, and lots more. And we've been working specifically with South Lakeland District Council, actually my local council over here in the Northwest, to support local businesses in this patch to address their impact. So the council have been providing a 50% subsidy for small businesses in this area to go through the process of achieving Green Small Business certification. And separately, they've been part funding the development of a carbon footprinting tool for businesses. There are quite a few sort of free tools out there already that are not great, and there's some paid for tools that are a bit better. But the council here, in conjunction with a wider collaboration in Cumbria, have developed a tool that has really sought to kind of strike the balance between being very robust and thorough on the one hand, but also being accessible for most businesses, even smaller businesses. And that's just been launched this month, and a program of support is being rolled out over the coming months as part of this wider Cumbria-wide collaboration. And we've now got 20 plus I think we're nearing 25 businesses certified under the scheme now, and there are plans to ramp up the support for small businesses in the area in the next financial year to significantly increase that number. And the development of the carbon footprinting tool has really provided us with an opportunity to integrate carbon measurement within the Green Small Business process, so that we are facilitating and enabling some measurement of the carbon benefits of that wider environmental management work as part of the work that we're doing with local businesses. And because, just to bring this back around to Conway and the whole issue of procurement, we're just beginning the conversations around what that might mean in terms of future procurement practices. So South Lakeland have committed to net zero within their own operations, including Scope 3, by 2030. And they've committed to a net zero carbon district by 2037. So they're obviously keen to understand how the work that they're supporting with small businesses is going to contribute to those targets within their own supply chain. So they're beginning to think about how they can build in some sort of carbon requirements within their procurement processes. And I think, like Conway, the intention is to provide some early signals to suppliers through through some early kind of mention of carbon within terms and conditions, and then ramping up those requirements over time, particularly through reference to external standards. So Green Small Business certification for smaller businesses, and probably incorporating some carbon reporting as part of that, alongside other appropriate standards for larger contractors. So just to wrap up, the drivers for carbon reduction are obviously rapidly increasing, and that's linked to kind of wider drivers for social value that are adding further impetus. So you might be familiar with the Green Paper on public procurement, which consulted on fairly major proposals for change, and that's at least partly about levering public sector procurement to support strategic priorities in the UK, and the specific mention of levering public procurement to deliver on the national net zero target. So increasing drivers and some of the tools to support public sector bodies are already available. Others are emerging, whether that's ISO standards for larger businesses or Green Small Business for smaller businesses. One of the government departments, BEIS, this week was promoting through an event the new SME climate commitments, which you may have seen. That's a sort of carbon reduction pledge for small businesses, and alongside the pledge, they're providing a suite of tools and resources to support small businesses in delivering on the pledges that they make. And you might also have come across the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is attempting to bring some consistency and robustness into the corporate climate commitments that are being made left, right and centre, it seems, at the moment. And that methodology underpins the SME climate commitment and a number of the other net zero pledges that are out there at the moment. And then the final thing is, if there's particularly if there's a desire to support smaller businesses, and that's implied in the push for social value, then there'll be a clear need to support local supply chains. And I'm sure there's lots of councils already thinking about this, but hopefully that South Lakeland District Council example is just another illustration of the possibilities in this field.